Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you, Amanda. I want to start by doing the introductions, but Amanda just stole our thunder there. So it's only my face you get to look at today, unfortunately. But these are the three of us, Cheryl and Jaleesa at Columbus Public Health, and I'm with Franklin County Economic Development and Planning. Quick overview of what we want to talk about today. And this was in the description of the webinar, but we want to talk a little bit about the background and development of the Local Food Action Plan and highlight for all of you the role of the Franklin County Local Food Council. And then we're going to talk about some lessons learned generally from food planning efforts and from implementation thus far. And Cheryl and Jaleesa will also be piping in during the presentation, but I think I have the first handful of slides. And I'm going to be referring to some notes off screen, so if I look like I'm not looking straight ahead at you, that's why. I want to start with a document that doesn't get talked about that much anymore. And I don't know if everybody's familiar with, but the Franklin County Food Policy Audit was created in 2012. This was a report that was developed by the Franklin County Local Food Council. And it was put together by Caitlin Marquis, who's a local food systems intern who is no longer in Central Ohio, but she was the main person, and Joe Clark and Brian Williams and other members of the Franklin County Local Food Council played a large role. The Franklin County Local Food Council was formed in 2011. And since that time, it's been advocating for all kinds of local government policies that support a strong and resilient local food system. And the council played a critical role in sort of housing that conversation and working on showing the need for a larger planning effort. And this 2012 report, which was an audit of all the county's food policy, was a place where that conversation really got started in a serious way. And I kind of look back at this as the first sort of real public document moving toward the Local Food Action Plan, what we have now. And a little bit more about that document. So the food policy audit, as I said, was developed by the council. It scored the food system policies in Franklin County across 4 broad categories. And there's a lot of detail in this plan. It's like a 40-page plan. We can provide a link afterward if people are interested in seeing it. So food security and sustainability was a category, zoning and land use, public health and food access, and then social equity. And this report also drew on the expertise of a lot of stakeholders, that's 13 institutions, many of whom were at public agencies. So there was a lot of pulling in of local government expertise into this report. The report provided 11 recommendations as well for priority policy areas. So the Food Council played a significant role in laying the foundation for understanding why a larger planning effort was needed by auditing existing policy with the food system in mind, and then highlighting recommended priority policy areas. And just as a side note, the final score of the audit is out of 100, and Franklin County food policy was scored at a 54. Now, this is not a broadly, there aren't a lot of examples of this test being used, so we can't really say if that's a good score or a bad score, but what we can say is that it's not 100, so there's a lot of room for more work. There's plenty of opportunity to do more things. So two ways that this helped lay the foundation for the Local Food Action Plan. First is that it, as I said, identified issues in the food system and strategic recommendations for addressing them, which hadn't been done in this kind of strategic way to that point. The second thing it did, which is very important, is it provided a structure and a process in which to build and strengthen relationships across the food system. It got people talking to one another, and the council served as a venue for that to happen. And it brought local government partners to the table in that process. An important point about this is that it wasn't just an audit that nobody looked at. The Franklin County Board of Commissioners actually adopted a resolution in support of a strong and resilient local food system as a result of this report. There's actually a great picture with all the commissioners at the time, and Jill and Caitlin and a couple other people from the council, all smiling. I couldn't find that picture for this report or for this presentation, but that resolution included a commitment to consider the impacts of the food system in future decisions that the county would make. And it also included a note about continuing to support the work of the Food Council. So you can see how that started to advance this issue and set an agenda for future work. That leads me into the Local Food Action Plan. So quick bit of background. Columbus City Council and the Franklin County Board of Commissioners have a long history of supporting local food initiatives, and that includes things like community garden grants and food business incubation programs and food access programming. However, as I mentioned, there was no strategic plan that addressed the needs broadly within the local food system. And there was no way to strategically think about the policy areas identified in the Franklin County Food Policy Audit. So obviously, without that kind of strategic plan, there's a diminished ability to effectively utilize resources and build that strong, resilient local food system that we want. So it took a couple of years after the Food Policy Audit was published in December of 2012 to move all the pieces into place to build the relationships to move toward this plan. The comprehensive planning process that produced this plan, the Local Food Action Plan, started in late 2014. And then 2 years later, in late 2016, the Local Food Action Plan was adopted as a policy platform by both Columbus City Council and the Franklin County Board of Commissioners. And this plan, for those of you who've looked at it, you know, but it provides a framework essentially for common goals and actions that can unify and coordinate the work of all kinds of community partners, local government, residents, schools, community organizations, businesses, civic organizations, all in support of that strong and resilient food system. I want to talk a little bit about the planning process, a little bit of background of the Local Food Action Plan itself. So the project team that led the creation of the Local Food Action Plan consisted of 3 partners: Columbus Public Health, Franklin County Economic Development and Planning, and Local Matters, the local nonprofit here in Columbus. Each of these entities were actively involved in the council as well, which is an interesting point. The Food Council helped cultivate the relationships that led to those who participated in the planning process to create this plan. And this partnership within the project team was unique because it brought together various perspectives that a lot of times don't get brought together. Economic development, public health, equity, social justice. These things were considered throughout the planning process in an intentional way because of who was at the table. 4 members of the project team were active members of the Franklin County Local Food Council during the planning process. So again, the council is serving as this critical venue to incubate and develop the ideas of the plan and continue to build these relationships. The plan and the project team was guided by a 24-member working committee. And that working committee was made up of community partners with very diverse local food system expertise. And a number of those working committee members also served on the Franklin County Local Food Council. And some joined the council as a result of the planning process itself. So there's this cross-pollination between the planning process and the Food Council. The working committee met 5 times to review the work of the project team and to provide direction and feedback. And there was public comment solicited throughout the planning process. There were 3 phases to the planning process, which I'm going to tell you about very briefly. There was current conditions envisioning, policy and program recommendations, and then plan creation. I'm going to dive into each of these and give you a little bit more information. And I apologize to those of you who've heard this several times. I'll try to make it as brief as possible. So the purpose of the current conditions and vision phase was to gain an understanding of current assets and needs in the community, and to understand the community's vision for the food system. So the project team that I mentioned reviewed all kinds of food planning documents and data and conducted stakeholder interviews and collected feedback from surveys. Local Matters, who's the community partner, facilitated 18 meetings in 7 Columbus neighborhoods to identify and explore neighborhood-specific goals to improve the food system. And there are actually food planning reports for each of those neighborhoods developed and on our website. The Food Council contributed through this phase 1 by holding listening sessions on specific food system topics. And that information was then contributed into the learning of the project team. Also, the findings from the food policy audit 2 years earlier were included in this process of getting a sense of what the current conditions and assets and gaps are in the food system. At the end of this phase, the project team collaborated with the working committee to produce the current conditions and vision report. And again, that report and all the reports I'm going to mention here are available on our website. So phase 2 of the planning process was the program and policy recommendations phase. And this phase identified actions with the greatest potential to have a positive impact on the issues identified in the previous phase. So first we identify the issues, we identify the assets and the gaps, we get a sense for best practices, and then we move into this phase where we think about how we can best address those things that we've identified. The project team conducted a very comprehensive review of all kinds of local, regional, state, and national best practices. This was consolidated into a list of potential actions that the working committee reviewed. The project team conducted additional research, identified additional model practices, solicited all kinds of stakeholder feedback on how these actions could be implemented and if they would be the right approach for our community. The Food Council during this period devoted their meetings to vetting these actions and to supporting the work of the project team. And council members actually were interviewed as stakeholders because many council members are content experts on particular areas of the food system. And so we, the project team would connect with the council in order to locate those content experts and talk about the feasibility or the applicability of certain actions for our local food system. At the end of this phase, the project team drafted the program and policy recommendations report, and that led to the identification of the final list of 27 actions that were ultimately included in the local food action plan. The final phase was actually creating the plan. So the project team further developed what they had come out of phase 2 with and drafted the local food action plan. That draft was reviewed by the working committee, it was reviewed by our legislative sponsors, and it was reviewed by the public during a 6-week comment period that included 11 feedback sessions and also an online survey. The Food Council during this period played a critical role of hosting public comment sessions and provided input and content expertise on the actions that have been identified. The council, through content experts, also helped develop what we call the getting started tables in the plan. Each of the 27 actions has a getting started table, which focused on how that action would be implemented and what the starting steps were. A common theme that we heard from the public comment period was the need for a clearly defined pathway for resident and community stakeholders to engage in food system efforts. And the council was seen as a key partner and a venue for this role moving forward. The final plan was completed and adopted as a policy framework in late 2016, as I mentioned earlier. And that adoption was by both Columbus City Council and the Franklin County Board of Commissioners, which is unique. There's only a handful of city-county food plans in the country. I'm going to hand it over to Cheryl now, and hopefully her microphone's working. And she's going to tell you more about what was in the plan and implementation efforts. And I'm going to control the PowerPoint. So Cheryl, you can just tell me when to move things forward.
All right, I'll do that. Thanks, Brian. Are you all able to hear me?
I am, so I hope that's good enough.
Brian hears me all the time. Brian, we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide here if we can. So Brian shared with you a little bit about the process that we went through, and I'm going to take us into kind of the results and some of the next steps that we followed through on this. But one of the things that came out of that entire process was a shared vision for our community. So within the feedback from the local food council, as well as the working committee, we drafted a vision statement that was again then vetted in one of our local food council meetings. And together we've all decided in the region that the vision that we have is a fair and sustainable food system that benefits our economy, our environment, and all people. So this has been kind of the working place that's been a very important factor for us, and that we've had a great opportunity within the council to kind of continue to use that to drive our work forward. And as Brian moves to the next slide for me, the other part of this process that came forward is the 4 primary goal areas that we are working in. And again, as we look at these, Brian described all the processes by which we came to these. Once again, the Food Council was very essential in helping us refine and really communicate these goals. So the plan has 4 goal areas that are intended to help us achieve our vision for the food system. Each one is supported by specific actions as well. And the first goal is that we are working to enhance coordination and communication among existing food resources and agencies. There's a tremendous amount of innovative and effective work happening in the food system in Columbus. Our local food council is a great place to see that in action. But we all felt, and we're confident in this concern, that there was a lack of coordination and alignment between those projects and that effort. And the Food Council was a place where people began to come together and talk about those things. And then the goal of the Food Action Plan is to take that to the next level and really foster and facilitate that type of coordination that's going to help us all be more effective. Goal B is to improve access to and education about healthy food, about affordable food, and about local food. We were very intentional in separating healthy food, affordable food, and local food because each of those is important in their own right for our food system. And there are also areas where, you know, the Food Council was very effective in helping us to kind of identify that there are different opinions about what those things mean. And so it's really important to never lose sight of the fact that all of those things are important in our food system, and that sometimes there has to be discussion around what those things mean to different folks in different situations. Goal C is to increase the role of food in economic development. We want to look at food as a driver of economic development, creating jobs and supporting a variety of businesses that enhance our local food system. And goal D is to prevent food-related waste. At this point, or at approximately 2 years ago, while we were developing the plan, the Solid Waste Authority of Central Ohio identified that approximately 13%, almost 14% of the material that enters the Franklin County landfill is food waste. And so not only do we want to think about that in terms of wasted food or edible food that could be repurposed for folks who need it, but also how do we divert the waste, the food waste, such as apple cores, those types of things, into compost or other products that are beneficial. And again, FLACO is interested in this not only from the perspective of managing those types of things as they enter the landfill, but their primary goal is to keep that landfill active and in use as long as possible. So moving that out of the food waste or the waste stream is very beneficial in that longevity. So as we moved into the process of implementation, one of the things that we found is that during the planning process, the Food Council and the Working Committee were both very, very vocal in the statement of we have to think about how this plan will be implemented as we move forward. Many of you have probably been involved in planning processes that have resulted in a beautiful document that ended up, you know, for lack of a better term, it was a good coffee table book. It's a suggestion, but it's not really being driven forward. And so, and that plan for implementation was essential. And so throughout the planning process, we recognized that that needed to be a part of our work. And as a matter of fact, the graphic representation that you see right here was first drafted on a napkin by Jill Clark at a council leadership team meeting. And this kind of came to be as a result of conversations at that executive team level, in the food council, at our local food team level. And so it's been refined a couple times. But the bottom line is that we really wanted to make sure that we took a grassroots to a grass top approach. So at the top, you'll see our local government legislative bodies who supported the planning effort and adopted the local food action plan. In the middle, you'll see the local food board that was formed by Columbus City Council and the Franklin County Board of Commissioners. And they're responsible for overseeing and guiding the implementation of the process. This board is made up of 12 appointed members. 6 are appointed by the county, and 6 are appointed by City Council. And so this is, again, with the legislative sponsors and the appointed members, this is our effort to really get to the grass top folks in our community. We really look at this board and the legislative sponsors as folks who can help us move social, political, financial, human capital to help those of us on the ground get our work done more effectively. And so that board is very carefully selected and is really intended to make sure that we have people who either are engaged in helping in the food system or should be engaged in the food system involved in this work. The local food team, which is Brian, myself, and Jaleesa, our city and county staff, whose job it is to work with that board to help us guide our efforts, to serve as a liaison between the board and legislative sponsors and other city and county departments, and as well as our serving as a liaison with our local food council as well. So, and then of course the entities are supported by an independent advisory group, which is our Franklin County Local Food Council, and then project teams that carry out the work of individual actions of the plan. And those are as needed teams. So we'll talk more about those in just a minute. So I shared with you a little bit about the local food board, but their overall role is to oversee and guide the activities related to the local food action plan. So they help us prioritize which actions are going to be tackled first, how we're going to move those forward, efforts to get them funded. We do have a board member who is a sponsor as we begin to work on an action, and that helps us with keeping those things moving forward. They help us evaluate proposals related to the food system involving city and community partners. So they also help us kind of vet things to recommend for city and county funding, those types of things. They provide an annual community update on local food system initiatives. And of course, our team provides support and capacity for that group. As I mentioned, the local food team, we carry out the work of the board and support the project teams. We connect the local food action plan to other food system efforts. So our goal is to understand and be knowledgeable about what's going on, be involved in things. Between Brian, Jaleesa, and I, we serve on a tremendous number of advisory boards, committees, those types of things to try and work to keep things connected. And we, in addition to keeping those connected to one another, we're responsible for providing updates to the board on those initiatives and making sure the board members are aware of what's happening in the community. And then we develop and help facilitate the annual progress reports on local food action plan implementation. And I'm going to turn it over to Jaleesa to kind of share with you the work of the project teams in the council and where the council is headed.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. Brian, can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? Great. Okay, so I am going to wrap up the implementation structure, lastly with the project teams. So they're a group of food system stakeholders working together to implement actions in the plan. And these teams are formed and overseen by the local food board, and we, the local food team, support their work. And then lastly, the Franklin County Local Food Council, they provide, as stated before, a pathway for residents and community participation in the implementation of the plan. And I'm going to go into greater detail about what they do in the next coming slide. So the local food board identified 2 actions to initiate implementation. The project teams have been formed to carry out implementation plans for these actions. And the council has had an active part in these project teams and in the ongoing work of implementation. The first project team is focused on the work supporting a strong farmers market management collaborative serving Columbus and Franklin counties. We recognize that there is already a statewide farmers market management network, and there's also the work of Produce Perks Columbus. So this implementation effort seeks to build on and strengthen the farmers market management collaborative serving Columbus and Franklin counties. And once they're formed, the group will work on initiatives such as a marketing plan that will increase consumer demand and support, a toolkit to support farmers and other direct sales opportunities outside of farmers markets, such as like farm stands, a community report on the role of farmers markets and ensuring fair access to food resources, as well as resources to support healthy food purchasing incentive programs such as Produce Perks with the double SNAP dollar. So overall, the goal is a thriving farmers market system where producers, including new producers, can sell their products to a broader range of customers and to get healthy food to residents who lack consistent access. The second project team is focused on connecting new or growing small food businesses to flexible financial and technical assistance options. They're working closely with the Council of Development Finance Agencies on their project BFAs to become more engaged in developing localized food systems. The premise of this project is to suggest and then prove that, if organized and defined properly, the food system can become a defined asset class worthy of traditional investment. And these project teams are looking at developing 2 tools for food businesses. One is Food Business Financing Toolkit, and the second is a technical resource guide. So if you'd like to hear updates about what these project teams are up to, you can always visit the Franklin County Local Food Council meetings and get your pens out. They are the 3rd Wednesday of every month from 4:30 to 6 o'clock in the Columbus Public Health Auditorium. And if you just want to get the meeting updates about what the project teams have been doing, you can go to the columbus.gov/LFAP, Local Food Action Plan, and select the tab on the left that says Project Team Updates. And we include all of the meeting materials, so the agenda, the meeting notes, and the PowerPoint. So our work is not confined to the actions as written in the Local Food Action Plan. We engage, coordinate, and collaborate with other food system efforts because we know that it benefits the community to work together rather than independently. So here are some examples of ways the local food team has worked with food system efforts that support the work of the plan. Ohio Days My Plate, My State offers 1 meal per month that's grown, raised, and or processed in Ohio. And this idea actually stems out of a partnership forged from the planning process of the Local Food Action Plan. Columbus City Schools, Columbus Public Health local food team members, Franklin County Public Health, and OSU Extension formed the Columbus City Schools Farm to School Working Group, which plans the menus and navigates sourcing of Ohio products, which is a very difficult task, but they're doing it greatly. Strive. Mid-Ohio Food Bank Urban Agricultural Grant is funding to build season extension infrastructure. A portion of the awardees' produce must be distributed to those in need. The local food team sits on the grant review panel, and they recognize that some of the grantees were having some difficulty getting their high tunnels approved by government entities. Since the local food team staff are city and county employees, they have connections to work with these departments in the city and county to improve and update procedures that make it difficult for people to navigate the system. Produce Perks Midwest is the statewide network, and you may know of them as Veggie Snap, but they double the value of SNAP dollars when spent on fruits and vegetables up to $10 per day, and that's actually changing to $20 a day. Our local Columbus group was integral in building the statewide network. Their work has significant impact on removing the financial barriers to access for our low-income residents, and thus they've received financial support from the city and county as their work aligns with our priorities and plans. Buckeye Institutional Supported Agriculture, which spurred out of Ohio State's goal of reaching 40% locally and sustainably sourced food by the year 2025. With a grant from the Kellogg Foundation, they will help build the capacity of local families, especially those with young children, to sell into Ohio State's dining services as well as other institutions. Local food team staff have linked groups who are teaching people how to grow food to this initiative. Without this connection, the groups may have never known about this opportunity, and we are also providing some free recruitment services to Ohio State to help them meet their goals. Okay. So you've heard of the many ways that the council was involved in the planning phase of the plan. So what happened after that? Did they just go back to business as usual, or do they have a role in implementing the plan? And I believe that they've wondered that for a while as well. So we asked the council to think about ways they would like to be involved in the work. And many responses were given, but what was agreed on by the council as well as the local food team was that they would provide a pathway for resident and community participation in the local food action plan implementation. They are our community engagement epicenter. And when people ask the city, what is the city or the county doing in food system efforts, or how can they get involved in the work of the plan, we direct them to the council meeting. And the local food team provides regular updates about the work of the plan and asks council members to join project teams and be involved in the process from start to finish. Those project teams, they're developing from start to finish what they will do. It's not like they're joining in the middle of the planning. The engagement goes two ways. So the council also has a standing seat at our local food board meeting to provide updates about their work and their opinions on the direction of the plan. As previously stated, the council is independent and non-governmental. Therefore, it's important that they maintain their autonomy. The council decided that they wanted help working with the plan, that they wanted to help with the work of the plan, but they also wanted to take on work that's outside of the plan. With that in mind, they knew they needed to help narrowing the focus of their work for the next 2 years. The local food team supported the council strategic plan process by hiring a facilitator and by funding some promotional materials for the council. They've held 2 strategy sessions for their voting members since February and have identified 3 priority actions for their 2018 to 2019 year. So under community engagement, there is education as well as engagement. So education is for not only the council members, but we wanted to make sure that we were reaching out to people in the community, those that were going to be affected by the actions of the food system. We've also done recruitment and outreach that fall under community engagement for those residents that are impacted by the plan, as well as, and we wanted to make sure that subject matter experts were engaging with those, with residents as well. We also looked at campaigns or initiatives that were come up with within council, so some council members may have had an idea, as well as those in the community who had an idea, say, for example, for a grocery walk. They can come to the council, and the council can help them flesh out their idea as well as bring capacity to that work. And then the last is mentorship, which is assistance for some food system ideas, kind of to help them, to help vet and evaluate their ideas and get them off of the ground. So I'm going to pass it on over to Cheryl for some lessons learned in the planning.
And I'm going to ask Brian to kind of just wave at me when he wants to jump in and add some pieces to this, because this is really, I think all of us who were involved in the local food action plan process really learned a lot in this process. And I think one of the things that was really well described by all of us is the level of collaboration and how important that was. as Brian mentioned early on, that unique partnership of health, economy, and social justice. But then the collaboration with the local food council was essential as well. The local food council had such tremendous historical perspective and experience in this area, and it allowed us to really be able to keep this work moving forward without losing that work that had already been done. So it allowed us to really have a firm footing for that. I mentioned earlier that mix of stakeholders, the grassroots, grass tops, high level, really kind of making sure that when we looked at our working committee, you know, many times with working committees, you kind of get those decision makers, you try to get those content experts, and we had a lot of folks there that were grassroots. We had community gardeners in the group, as well as, you know, executive directors for organizations, and we had some of the best conversations that I think that we've ever experienced there. So I really think that one of the lessons we learned was not to be afraid of, you know, mixing our levels of stakeholders in this process. It was definitely an iterative process, and I know Brian had some things here about developing the council and the food plan policy audit, and the plan. It was definitely developed over time and built upon one another.
Yeah, Cheryl, if you want me to jump in here, I can make a comment on
yeah.
this.
Yes.
Thanks. Yeah, so the process was very iterative, and I stress that because I've talked to a few people around the country and around Ohio who are interested in doing a food plan of some sort, and it makes sense to me from one perspective, but everybody wants to jump right into like doing a plan, like writing a plan, and we got to get everybody together and throw together some actions and all that, and that energy makes a lot of sense, and it probably would have made a lot more sense to me a few years ago before I went through this. But what I learned through this is that there are stages of development for a planning effort like this. We needed to develop and strengthen the capacity of our council here in Franklin County. And that council needed to be a venue where relationships and trust could be built. And that trust and relationship could be built between different kinds of partners. It's in the venue of the council where Columbus Public Health and Franklin County Economic Development and Planning started to meet up and sort of see what the other's doing. And there isn't a natural venue anywhere that I'm aware of where those two would come up against each other. So the iterative process of developing the trust, building the relationships, moved into a planning effort that was sustainable. Without that level of trust and those developed relationships, there wasn't going to be a planning effort that would be sustainable and be able to support the weight of all of these different perspectives and these different institutional partners. So yeah, Cheryl, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, and as we mentioned earlier, the importance of planning for implementation. The one thing I will say, you know, when I look at our lessons, it's not only the things that we did well, but I think when we planned for implementation, we did a really solid job of thinking about the infrastructure for getting things put together. But like many other organizations, we probably didn't do as good a job of thinking about how we were going to fund things once we got them there. And you know, we've had some wonderful support from our legislative sponsors, but many of these projects go beyond the scope of what city and county can fund or should fund. You know, not everything is within the purview of the work of a local government. So, you know, when we thought about that, thinking a little bit more about that strategy. Now, the beauty of the work that we did with implementation planning is that we have a structure that's allowing us to really tap into a tremendous amount of expertise on how to fund projects and get them done. Our board members are made up of a number of folks who have great experience and knowledge in this area. So we're working on that strategic planning right now, but it might have been helpful to do a little bit more of that in the planning process. I think the other thing that's important for councils to recognize is that local government buy-in brings support and resources, but it also brings a level of ownership and kind of driving processes. So, you know, for example, in our community, we were very fortunate that our implementation strategy included some staffing, but that also means that there has to be a kind of connection and give and take between community partners and city and county departments. You know, we bring capacity. Jaleesa and I, you know, work on a number of projects, help with grant writing, those types of things. Brian provides technical assistance and support in developing different reports and projects, a recent development of a resource guide. So there's a lot of things that we're able to bring to that. But it also doesn't mean that the city and county are going to now be able to fund every project that comes their way. So it's a matter of kind of recognizing how those resources can best be deployed. And then, you know, and I'm sure Brian has some things to add to this, that co-learning and code development, that's, you know, that it's owned by everyone in the process. One of the things that I remember very distinctly right after the plan was adopted, and Jaleesa, you know, mentioned it earlier about the question of, you know, what's our role in implementation? You know, we were successful with this group in actually getting the city and county to adopt a policy platform for local food. And, you know, our council had worked for so long on policy recommendations and strategies. It took a little bit of time to kind of step back and go, hey, wait a minute, we got that part done. So how do we actually get these policies and things implemented? So, you know, it's that co-learning of what did we learn about it? How do these processes work together? The council's learning how city and county government works. We're learning how to engage with partners to get things done. So I think it was very, it's been eye-opening for everyone in the process.
And I would just add there that you know, hierarchical structures like local government institutions can only be flattened out so much in a planning process. But this was fairly flat in terms of organizational structures relative to other planning processes I'm familiar with. You had two large governments at the table, and you had a community partner. And Cheryl and I both served on that project team, and it was a pretty even playing ground. Everybody had their opinions and perspectives, and things were shared openly, and issues were discussed and debated at times in a very open and respectful fashion. And that created new forms of knowledge, and it created new perspectives, and things that public health learned kind of rubbed off on economic development and planning, and vice versa. And so that co-learning creates ownership and creates a sense of moving forward together that I think creates ownership. I'm going to move to the next slide and talk about the lessons learned now that we've moved into implementation. And these are things to keep in mind for food plans moving forward as you're thinking about, you know, when you're planning, you're just focused on planning. And it's helpful to think forward a little bit sometimes in terms of the strategy of how might we implement things. So Cheryl mentioned strategically planning for ongoing funding. How do we support this work once the plan is developed? And how does it get paid for? Who are the people at the table? We had to think about, now that we're implementing, building trust and relationships with different agencies, right? We are at the table, Columbus Public Health, and we are Franklin County Economic Development Planning. Well, what about the Columbus Department of Development? And what about Franklin County Public Health? And what about all the other various agencies, the City Department of Neighborhoods, for instance? How do we start to create relationships within the government and between the governments to create more connections and to create more resiliency, so that we don't always have to be the hub of the wheel, but that we can start to create connections between different spokes? Adaptability and experimentation. We're still in this process. Cheryl's fond of saying, we might come back to you in 6 months and say, this didn't work. We got to try something else now. So we're still trying to figure out how do we adapt, how do we experiment, how do we learn what works. This is a unique kind of plan. It's a unique implementation structure. I do not know of another implementation effort with the food system that has this kind of structure. This is a one-off. And so we are experimenting and trying to make it work. The lesson learned is we have to work on that pathway for resident community engagement. That's why we're remaining engaged with our local food council. That's why the local food team provides capacity for the food council to continue their work. And we talked about how we had a mix of stakeholders at the table for planning, but we have to continue to bring that mix of stakeholders into implementation. And we have to find roles for all the levels, grassroots, grass tops, and high level. So those are some of the lessons we learned through implementation. Jaleesa, do you want to go forward with this slide?
Yeah, so if you want to read the plan, you don't want to read the entire plan and just the executive summary. If you want to see what we did in 2017 in the annual report, or view any of the planning documents, the structure of implementation is all on our local food action plan website. Instead, you just go to www, right at the bottom of the screen, .columbus.gov/LFAP. And our contact information is right here as well. But if you go to the website, it's on the left-hand side of the website, and we would love to take a call or respond to an email.
And we took all but 5 minutes, so I hope there aren't a ton of questions. But Amanda, anything?
There's one so far from Robin, and she wanted to know how often do each of the various groups meet?
Oh, that's a good question. I can answer that really quickly. So the local food board, which is that 12-member city and county appointed board, has quarterly meetings. So there are 4 meetings per year, and those are spaced out throughout the year. The local food team, which is myself, Jaleesa, and Cheryl, we meet weekly, actually. We have a weekly meeting on Tuesdays to stay connected and aligned, and we communicate regularly throughout the week as well. That's another challenge of having 2 governments working together is we're in different supervisory structures. Our governments sometimes have different priorities, and we're in different buildings. So we have to bring all that to the table and figure out how to work together. And then the Food Council, as Jaleesa mentioned earlier, has a monthly gathering. You can see that on their website, which is fclocalfoodcouncil.org. Is it .org? I think it's .org. And the project teams meet on an ad hoc basis as needed. And if you look on the columbus.gov/LFAP website, you can see more information about that.
All right. Do we have any other questions for our folks today?
I don't see any more. Well, I guess we fixed everything. I guess it's all good.
All right. Well, just 2 other reminders before we debrief. First, thank you to Brian, Cheryl, and Jaleesa for presenting. This was a very popular webinar. I got 5 emails during your talk to ask if it was recorded, so very exciting. Also, there are 2 spots open for the virtual convenings for the remainder of this year in the fall. So if you would like to, you or your organization present for one of those, please feel free to reach out to me. Also, we'll start scheduling the 2019 convenings as well. So if you want to do something a little further out, we can get you penciled in. And then as Jill noted in the chat box, that the Ohio Food Policy Network Summit will be on September 24th. So save that date and look forward to more information from the planning team in the next few months. All right, well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions, so we can all adjourn for the day. But thank you for joining us, and then thank you again, Brian, Cheryl, and Jaleesa.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Have a good day.
All right, thank you.